Imagine you're walking down a really dark alley in a notoriously dangerous city.
Oh, setting the scene right away.
Right. So a mugger steps out from the shadows, pulls a knife on you.
Terrifying.
Your heart just totally drops. But suddenly, a billionaire dressed as a giant bat drops from the sky, beats the mugger to a pulp, leaves him hanging upside down from a fire escape, and then just vanishes into the night.
Just a totally normal Tuesday.
Exactly. You're safe. You get to go home. But here is the crazy question we're asking you today. Did that billionaire just destroy the entire legal system in the process?
It's a really wild scenario to visualize. I mean, when you put it like that.
Right. Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah, it really gets at the core of what we are analyzing today, which is this complete and utter institutional collapse.
Yeah.
And, the desperate kind of chaotic ways people try to simulate order when the rules just stop working.
We have a massive stack of sources for you today. Like, we're pulling from a university lecture by a philosophy chair named Mark White.
Super interesting stuff in there.
Oh, definitely. Plus, an academic law review on children's cartoons, a really dense constitutional analysis of vigilantism, a religious perspective on justice from Summit Ministries, and a highly passionate Reddit debate.
As Reddit debates usually are.
Always. But the mission here isn't just to talk about comic books. We are using the figure of Batman as a wedge to unpack the deepest, messiest questions about how we define justice, morality, and, well, systemic failure in our real-world institutions.
Because it really is all connected.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this starting with the mind of the vigilante himself.
Right. So to understand the external actions of a vigilante, you first have to understand the philosophical engine driving them internally.
Makes sense.
I've actually set my backdrop today to a dimly lit kind of Gotham-esque cityscape, but interwoven with these towering, dusty shelves of a vast legal library.
I love that. Very moody.
Thanks. Because that intersection of dark alleys and rigid legal theory is exactly where this character operates.
So where do we start with the philosophy?
Well, in Dr. Mark White's lecture at Ohio Northern University, he breaks down this vigilante's moral code. And he shows that it's actually a massive, super unstable collision of different ethical systems.
Unstable how?
Well, he starts by analyzing utilitarianism, noting that this is the philosophy that modern economics is really built upon.
Hold on, wait. I usually hear utilitarianism talked about in a philosophy class, not in economics. How does a vigilante punching people connect to economic theory?
I know it sounds like a stretch, but it connects through the concept of homo economicus.
Which is what exactly?
It's the idea of the completely rational, self-interested human being.
Yeah.
Like in classical economics, every decision a person makes is assumed to be a calculation.
Like risk versus reward.
Exactly. Aimed at maximizing their own utility, or happiness, while minimizing their pain.
Okay, I track that.
So, utilitarianism as a broader philosophy applies that exact same math, but to society as a whole. The morally correct action is whatever maximizes happiness and minimizes pain for the greatest number of people.
Ah, okay.
So on a macro level, Batman's entire mission is deeply utilitarian. I mean, he sacrifices his own time, his body, his wealth, to minimize the aggregate pain of Gotham's citizens.
That makes a lot of sense. He's basically doing the brutal math to keep the city's pain levels down.
He is. But his methods are governed by a completely different philosophy that actively fights against that utilitarian math.
Really? What's the second philosophy?
That would be Kant's deontology.
Deontology. Break that down for me, because that sounds like a medical term.
It really does. But Immanuel Kant argued that morality isn't about the consequences of your actions at all. It's about the rules you follow and your motivations.
Okay, so ignoring the math entirely.
Right. He proposed what he called the categorical imperative. These are absolute moral rules that must be followed no matter what the outcome is. You don't look at the math, you look at the rule.
So how does that apply to our billionaire in a bat suit?
Well, for Batman, his famous no-kill rule operates as a Kantian absolute.
Oh, wow. I see.
Yeah, he refuses to take a human life because he believes it violates the fundamental sanctity of humanity. Even if, say, killing one person would definitively save 10,000 people, his deontological rule just holds firm. He will not cross that line.
And this is where that Reddit debate in our sources gets incredibly heated.
Oh, it gets so intense.
Right, because from a strict utilitarian standpoint, that no-kill rule is actually a profound moral failure.
Yes.
The users in that forum bring up a really fascinating quote from the philosopher Adam Smith. He said, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent."
That is a heavy quote.
It is. If you spare a mass murderer like the Joker, you aren't actually saving a life. You are just guaranteeing that he will eventually escape Arkham Asylum and kill again.
Exactly.
By keeping your one absolute rule, you are actually maximizing the pain of the city.
And that tension is exactly why Dr. White's lecture ties this contradiction into a third ethical framework, which is virtue ethics.
Oh, throwing a third one into the mix.
We have to. Going all the way back to Aristotle, this philosophy isn't about the math of utilitarianism, and it isn't about the strict rules of deontology either.
What's it about, then?
It's about the pursuit of moral excellence. The Greek term is arete.
Arete.
The focus is entirely on the internal character of the actor. The argument is that by sticking to his code through sheer willpower, despite the overwhelming temptation to kill the villain, the hero is trying to serve as an exemplar of moral purity.
Like being a beacon of light.
Exactly. He is trying to be a virtuous person in a deeply corrupted world.
But wait, are we saying Batman's most heroic trait is actually just supreme selfishness?
How do you mean?
Because if you think about it, it's like a surgeon who refuses to perform a life-saving amputation because they took a personal, spiritual vow to never cut human tissue.
Oh, that's an intense analogy.
But it fits, right? They are leaving the patient to die just to preserve their own moral purity. If he refuses to end a massive threat, he's basically prioritizing keeping his own hands clean over the actual physical safety of the people he's supposed to be protecting.
Well, Dr. White's lecture highlights that very critique. He actually calls it a potential perversion of true virtue ethics.
A perversion? Wow.
Yeah, the danger is that the hero becomes so obsessively focused on his own internal integrity that the actual bleeding victims in the city just become collateral damage to his moral code.
That's horrifying.
It creates a terrifying structural imbalance. The hero's soul is essentially treated as more important than the citizens' lives.
Wait, okay, so if Batman's internal ethics are this much of a mess and his actions are potentially resulting in more harm, then he isn't actually solving the foundational problems of his city at all.
Not really, no.
He's just operating his own private justice system, which really begs the question, what happens when his private, contradictory ethics collide with the actual constitutional laws of a city?
That brings us perfectly to social contract theory, and really the fundamental definition of a modern state.
Okay, lay it on me.
We have to look at the sociologist Max Weber. Weber defined the state as the single entity that holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force.
Monopoly on force.
Think about it. The police and the military are supposed to be the only groups legally allowed to use violence to maintain order.
Right, because if a random citizen tackles someone on the street, it's assault.
Exactly. But if a police officer does it, it's an arrest.
But Gotham is a city where that monopoly has completely failed. Like, the institutions are totally corrupt, the police are on the mob's payroll, and the state just cannot maintain order.
Right. And the philosophers in our sources interpret that specific failure through two distinct lenses.
Who are we looking at?
First, Thomas Hobbes. He described the state of nature. This is a hypothetical time before government existed, where life was, in his words, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Sounds...
Yeah, a literal war of all against all. So under a Hobbesian lens, Gotham is sliding rapidly back into that anarchic state of nature.
And the vigilante.
He steps in to simulate order, using a might makes right approach. He uses physical terror and violence because the state has lost its monopoly and just can no longer protect its people.
So in a Hobbesian world, he's really just the biggest, scariest monster, keeping the other monsters in check.
Yeah, basically, yes. But the sources also bring up John Locke's interpretation, which is a bit different.
How so?
Locke provides a slightly different legal justification. He argued that human beings enter into a social contract. We willingly give up our natural personal right to use violence, and we hand that power to the state.
Right, to keep us safe.
But we only do this on the condition that the state will actually protect our life, liberty, and property.
Which Gotham totally fails to do.
Exactly. So if the state becomes deeply corrupt and fails to provide that protection, it has breached the contract. Under Lockean theory, that failure dissolves the state's monopoly on justice.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Your natural right to self-defense is restored, which essentially justifies the vigilante stepping outside the law to do the state's job.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because stepping outside the law has massive constitutional consequences in the real world.
Huge consequences.
Our sources dive deep into the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. But those constitutional rules only apply to the government, right? They don't apply to private citizens.
That is correct, unless the private citizen is acting as an agent of the state.
Okay, and this is where the legal analysis in our stack breaks down the Lugar test, right? Which determines when a private citizen crosses that line.
Yes.
I read through that test, and honestly, the legal jargon is incredibly dense. It talks about a deprivation prong and a fairness prong. Can we just break that down into plain English?
Sure, absolutely. Think of the Lugar test like a bouncer at a nightclub.
Okay, a bouncer.
The bouncer is a private employee, not a police officer. If the bouncer decides to search your pockets before letting you in and find something illegal, they haven't violated your Fourth Amendment rights.
Because they aren't the government.
Exactly. That is just a private interaction.
Or right, because the Constitution restricts the government, not the guy working the door at the club.
Precisely. But imagine a police officer suspects you have something illegal, but they don't have a warrant. So the cop walks up to the bouncer, hands him a $20 bill, and says, "Hey, go search that guy's pockets for me."
Oh, wow. Okay.
The moment the bouncer does that, he becomes an agent of the state. His actions are legally attributed to the government, meaning your Fourth Amendment rights were just violated.
So applying that to Gotham, if the vigilante is just out roaming the streets on his own, beating up muggers, he's the private bouncer.
Right.
But if the Gotham City Police Department is actively coordinating with him, like, say, shining a giant spotlight with a bat symbol into the clouds to summon him for help, he legally crosses the line and becomes a state actor.
That is exactly what the Lugar test establishes. And our sources point to a fascinating real-world precedent from 2023, Clark v. State.
What happened in that case?
It involved a civilian sting group called Predator Catchers, Inc. The defense actually brought up the Batman analogy in court.
No way, really?
Yes. And the judge ruled that if the police merely sit back and passively receive tips from a civilian after the fact, it's legally acceptable.
Okay, so dropping a tied-up mugger off at the precinct is fine.
Essentially, yes. But if the police actively coordinate with the civilian beforehand, directing their actions or asking for their help, it constitutes a violation of constitutional rights.
And if constitutional rights are violated, that triggers the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, right?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Any evidence gathered unconstitutionally by a state actor is poisoned, and any subsequent evidence found because of that initial illegal search is also poisoned.
It's just thrown out.
Completely inadmissible in a court of law.
Okay, so does Batman actually make Gotham's legal system completely powerless to convict the villains he catches?
In many ways, yes.
Because the supreme irony here is that by using a vigilante to bypass all the bureaucratic red tape, the police are actively guaranteeing that criminals will go free on procedural technicalities.
From a strict procedural law standpoint, absolutely. Every single time he dangles a suspect off a skyscraper without reading them their Miranda rights.
Which is all the time.
Or uses military-grade sonar to spy on every cell phone in the city without a warrant, he renders that evidence legally useless.
That is wild.
The analysis shows that when the state relies on a vigilante to secure convictions, it compromises its own foundational legitimacy. It invites anarchy by basically becoming a lawbreaker itself.
So if his actions mean criminals get off on technicalities, then he isn't actually solving crime, he's just putting on a show.
A very expensive show.
Exactly. So if this whole system is broken, who is actually benefiting from keeping it this way?
For that, we have to look at the political economy of the billionaire vigilante.
Yeah.
And the sources bring in Jean-Jacques Rousseau to explain this.
Rousseau? What did he say?
Rousseau argued that formal legal systems in civil society aren't actually neutral, objective rulebooks.
Shocking.
Right. They are often structures designed by the wealthy and powerful to legitimize their own property and maintain control over the poorer classes.
So the law is essentially a tool to codify the systemic inequality.
From a structural critique, yes.
Right.
And the billionaire vigilante embodies this perfectly. Consider a traditional folk hero, like Robin Hood.
Okay, sure.
Robin Hood was an outlaw who operated outside the system, but his mission was entirely redistributive. He stole from the hoarding ruling class and gave resources directly back to the impoverished.
And Batman.
Batman operates in the exact opposite direction. He utilizes his vast corporate empire and hundreds of millions of dollars in high-tech, military-grade weaponry to physically assault low-level, impoverished street criminals who are, often just acting out of sheer desperation.
It's like owning the factory that pollutes the river and then spending your nights beating up the people who get caught stealing your bottled water.
That is a brutally accurate way to frame it.
But wait, what about his philanthropy? The sources mention the Thomas Wayne Renewal Fund. And Bruce Wayne gives away billions to charity. Doesn't that balance the scales?
The texts argue that his charity actually exposes the severe limits of neoliberal philanthropy.
So?
The critique here is that the billionaire is only treating the symptoms of societal decay, things like street crime and desperation.
Yeah.
He ignores, or actively benefits from, the root causes of that decay.
Which are?
Poverty, systemic neglect, and corporate exploitation. The corporate activities of the wealthy class generate the very desperation that drives the crime he then violently suppresses.
So just looking at this impartially as it is presented in the text, is the argument essentially that the vigilante narrative is just billionaire propaganda defending his own property and the capitalist status quo?
That is a primary critique from the structural socioeconomic lens provided in our sources.
Yes.
By focusing society's attention purely on punishing individual bad actors, rather than reforming the broken economic systems that created those actors in the first place, the vigilante acts as a heavily armed safety valve.
That's safety valve.
He suppresses the unrest of the poor, which preserves the very system that keeps his own billionaire class on top. It basically functions as a closed, self-sustaining loop.
And that loop relies entirely on violence and punishment.
Entirely.
If this retributive justice system is fundamentally broken, what is the alternative? Because our sources actually offer a completely different blueprint for how a hero can operate. And it comes from an unexpected place.
It really does. We have a law review article analyzing how children's cartoons shape our understanding of justice.
Cartoons.
Yes. The author points out that mainstream shows like Batman and Justice League rely almost entirely on retributive justice.
Retributive justice, the idea of just deserts. It's all about punishment, incapacitation, and what the author calls the warrior narrative. Like, it treats good and evil as a static binary. You find the bad guy, you hit them very hard, you lock them in a dark cell, and boom, justice is served.
Right. And the law review contrasts this heavily with the cartoon Steven Universe, which models restorative justice.
Before we jump into the cartoon, what does restorative justice actually look like in the real world?
A great real-world example happens in progressive school systems. Let's say two kids get into a fight on the playground.
Okay.
A retributive approach simply hands them both a suspension. The rule was broken, here's the punishment.
Makes sense, that's what usually happens.
But a restorative approach brings the two kids, their parents, and a counselor into a room. The focus isn't on the rule that was broken, it's on the harm that was done.
Oh, I like that.
The kids actually have to talk to each other, understand why the fight happened, and figure out how to repair their relationship so they can share the playground safely.
And the example of this from Steven Universe is just incredible. There's this massive apocalyptic threat called the cluster.
Right, the cluster.
It's a giant mass of shattered, mutant alien gems trapped in the Earth's core, and it's threatening to detonate and destroy the entire planet.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. In literally any other superhero story, this is the climax where the hero punches the bomb or throws it into the sun.
But Steven takes a remarkably different path. He doesn't attack it at all.
What does he do?
He slows down, closes his eyes, and physically projects his consciousness into the cluster just to listen.
Wow.
He uses empathetic, dialogue-based communication, and he realizes these fractured gem shards aren't inherently evil. They are lashing out because they are fragmented, they're terrified, and they're lonely.
That is so profound for a kid's show.
It really is. Steven refuses to fight them. Instead, he listens to their pain and helps them find community with one another, which calms their volatile energy down.
He literally heals the threat instead of incapacitating it.
Exactly. And the show culminates in this beautiful finale episode, Change Your Mind. The ultimate conflict with the supreme dictator of the universe, White Diamond, is resolved through what is essentially a massive family conference.
A family conference with a space dictator.
Yep. The narrative reveals that White Diamond's oppressive dictatorial behavior stems from her own repressive perfectionism.
Oh, wow.
She is suffering under her own impossible standards, projecting her self-hatred onto everyone else. Steven teaches her self-compassion. He shows her that embracing imperfection is better than violently repressing it.
That's beautiful.
The author of Law Review argues this is a profound subversion of the traditional warrior narrative we see in media.
And this transition from vengeance to healing isn't just happening in cartoons either.
No, it's not.
The source material from Summit Ministries looks at this exact same shift, but through a theological lens. And just to be clear for everyone listening, we are impartially summarizing the text's religious viewpoint here.
Right, exactly.
They trace Bruce Wayne's realization that his vengeance is just perpetuating a cycle of violence. To actually save his city, he has to shift his motivation from vengeance to becoming a symbol of hope.
And the Summit Ministries text introduces the biblical concept of mishpat. This is a Hebrew word for justice that encompasses far more than just retributive consequences.
What does it encompass?
Mishpat demands active, restorative advocacy for the vulnerable and oppressed. The text argues that human heroes, even at their absolute best, are inherently flawed and just cannot provide lasting salvation from systemic evil.
So who can, in their view?
From their theological standpoint, Jesus represents the ultimate hope in the perfect execution of this restorative justice, essentially bridging the gap that human vigilantism just cannot reach.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? We aren't fighting the Joker in dark alleys, and we certainly aren't drilling to the center of the earth to talk to a giant gem cluster.
Probably not, no.
But how often do we use a retributive Batman mindset in our own conflicts, like at work, or in our personal relationships, when we really should be using a restorative Steven Universe mindset?
It's a great question.
How often do we just want to punish the person who wronged us instead of doing the incredibly hard, uncomfortable work of dialogue and healing?
It is a vital takeaway. Looking at the journey we've taken through these sources today, we've traveled from Kantian ethics and constitutional law all the way to economic theory and children's cartoons.
It's been a ride.
And all of these different lenses converge on one central truth. Justice cannot just be about capturing and punishing the bad guy. True justice requires healing the community.
Healing the community.
And we have to remember that the media we consume, the cartoons we watch as kids, the blockbuster movies we line up for as adults, it directly shapes our real-world expectations of how the justice system should work.
It really does.
If we only consume media where heroes solve complex societal problems with their fists, we will only build institutions that do the exact same thing.
It really changes how you look at a comic book, or any action movie for that matter. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there is one last, totally mind-bending concept from that Reddit debate that completely upends everything we've talked about.
Oh, it really does. It completely pulls the rug out from under the vigilante's entire moral code.
Okay, lay it on us.
The Reddit source points out a fundamental flaw in the reality of the comic book universe itself, which is the revolving door of death and resurrection.
Right, because in comics, nobody actually stays dead.
Exactly. If villains like the Joker constantly break out of Arkham Asylum without fail, or if characters literally magically come back to life after being killed, then the whole debate over the no-kill rule is completely moot.
Because the rules of reality just don't apply.
Right. If the narrative universe dictates that the villain will always return, then the hero's refusal to kill isn't actually a moral triumph at all.
What is it then?
It is just a Sisyphean performance piece. The hero and the villain are trapped in this endless symbiotic dance where neither is actually trying to solve the problem.
Oh, wow.
The hero gets to feel morally superior by maintaining his code. The villain gets to keep causing chaos to test that code. And the normal citizens of Gotham are just permanent, disposable props in their never-ending stage play.
That is incredibly bleak. It makes that neat, orderly flowchart of justice we usually imagine feel completely irrelevant.
Totally irrelevant.
You look up at that bat symbol projected against the clouds, and you realize it's not a signal for a solution. It's just a spotlight on a broken system that is designed, by its very nature, to stay broken forever.
Definitely something to mull over the next time you look up at the night sky.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of Gotham and the real-world systems it reflects. We'll see you next time.